Hi everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video we're going to do a deep dive into all of the trinkets that are going to be available in the Sanctum of Domination raid in patch 9.1 for World of Warcraft. I gave you a sneak preview of this in the Torghast video earlier. We're still in Torghast, as you can see, but I said, hey, let's do a proper look. Let's do a proper look. We're going to begin with Healer, though, of course, some of these Healer trinkets are just general caster intellect trinkets. I figured we start with Healer because that's the stuff that we'll start with what fewest people are interested in, and then we'll sort of build up. But I will have obviously everything timestamped in the description if you want to jump to whatever agility, damage trinkets, or whatever you want. Okay, let us go. First one up then is the Carved Ivory Keepsake, which gives you some flat intellect, and then the equip effect is passive. You have a chance to have foreseen damage taken by your allies, healing them instantly for 257 when they are attacked. So obviously all of these numbers, by the way, are placeholder. They're not only subject to change, but they are expected to change, right? These are not the final numbers, but still, it's a intellect stat stick, and then it's just going to just randomly heal people. Now, one thing to note is that this will always be effective healing, which is actually quite valuable. It won't over heal people, right? It's going to heal them right after they've taken damage. In other words, they need the healing. So yeah, no over healing, effective healing. So it's not too bad. Not the most interesting thing in the world, but it's okay. Next up, we have the Resonant Silver Bell. So intellect on this again. When you equip, you are accompanied by a spectral familiar. When you heal a target below 50% health, your familiar will rush to them and heal them for an additional chunk of healing. After healing, your familiar requires 30 seconds before it can reconstitute itself. Now, this seems a lot stronger, right? So this is not just going to be random bits of healing when people need it. This is an extra big chunk of healing when people need it more. So when you've healed someone that is below half health, this should proc pretty frequently. Actually, you should be able to get lots of value out of this proc, and it's going to be extra healing when you need it. So I think that this is quite a powerful passive trinket. Actually, this seems quite good. Next up is an intriguing one, the Scrawled Word of Recall, which again has intellect, and then it says here a use effect, but I wonder if this might be just a passive effect. It reduces the remaining cooldown of your penance by 532 seconds. Now, this is what I mean by placeholder. This could, though, be something like 5.3 seconds. Intriguing enough, if I knock it down to, let's say, Raid Finder, and we take a look at it, it's 370 seconds. So the cooldown reduction does scale based off of the item level of the trinket very much. So we're looking at the mythic versions here. Penance, by default, is a 9-second cooldown. Oh, you guys can't see that if I remove me. Penance by default is a 9-second cooldown. If this was actually knocking 5 seconds off of Penance, that would be actually insane in terms of how it would affect your rotation. So we shall see. Again, it is still up in the air as to which specific spells this could affect. It does Circle of Healing for Holy Priest at the moment, but exactly whether it will stay with those spells, whether it will change or not, we'll have to see. But this could be a really interesting new trinket, which basically has the concept of taking one of your core abilities, that's part of your core rotation, one of those really efficient abilities, and just giving it a shorter cooldown. So actually just changing up your rotation with this. If this is what it sounds like, it's kind of like it is quite like a class set tier bonus, to be honest. It's on that sort of level of things. So I like it a lot. Next up, we have the Shadowed Orb of Torment. This is the most controversial. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready? I know we're in the healer section, but get yourself pumped up, because this is... Okay, we've moved strongly into the DPS section right here. Here we go. So intellect, stat stick on it, once again. But this is an on-use trinket, presumably with like a 2-minute cooldown, one assumes. Spend 2 seconds gazing into the orb, tormenting yourself to gain greater insight into the patterns of reality. Increases your mastery by a massive chunk for 45 seconds at the cost of a chunk of health. Oh boy. Yep, this is Ashara's Font of Power 2.0. This is the reason actually I made this video, because my guild Discord, they're going a little bit crazy having seen this thing. I think one of our Moonkins actually almost died. He was so excited. But this is pretty nutty. This is pretty nutty. So yeah, it's also again, the numbers are not final, but a 45-second buff is really long. If that is the case, I know that they seem to not want to do this, which I agree with double on use. They nerfed Imperial Ordnance, which would let you do this, where you would do something like you would pop this trinket, let's say whatever, 20 seconds before you're going to do your burst window. So let's say 20 seconds before you combust, you activate this trinket, and then 20 seconds later, you pop your other on-use trinket, you pop your combust, and this buff is still carried over. Now, I expect they will not let that happen, so I expect this to not go live, allowing you to do that. But nonetheless, this is going to be a trinket, most likely. You channel for a couple of seconds, you give up a couple of seconds of DPS, you have to stand still, but then it gives, and it's probably going to hurt you a good chunk of health, but it's going to massively up your burst damage. So yeah, essentially any caster spec in the game that has a powerful DPS cooldown, you are probably going to be using this thing. Now, it is intellect on it, so yeah, this should be only for casters. We'll see. But yeah, we shall see. But this seems really strong. It could even be so strong that maybe even some melee specs and stuff will use it. We'll see. And then finally, for this sort of healer section that's bled now into DPS, we have the Titanic Ocular Gland. This is intellect, agility, and strength. When your health is above 50%, you are judged worthy, increasing your highest stat by a big chunk. While your health is below half, though, you're judged unworthy, decreasing your highest stat by a big chunk. So this is your Warcraft logs dream trinket, right? Stay high health, and this trinket's going to be insanely valuable. Not so as good on progression, but yeah, it depends on the fight. It depends on the fight and what sort of health sort of state you're in when you're doing your big burst. This could potentially be actually genuinely very good on some fights. Could be very bad on other fights if, you know, the damage windows overlap with crazy damage taken windows. So we'll see, but that could be a very powerful one. So that was Holy. If we jump over to Shadow and we look at some of the specific damage ones for casters, we have two new ones here. So we still, of course, have the Shadowed Orb of Torment and the Titanic Ocular Gland. Ebonsoul Vice, again, it's an intellect stat stick with an on-use effect. Curse your target, doing a chunk of shadow damage every 2 seconds for 12 seconds. The duration increases by up to 100% based on their missing health. If their target dies while Ebonsoul Vice is active, they leave a shredded soul behind, which you can collect to gain a small chunk of critical strike for 12 seconds. So, quite interesting. An execute-focused trinket. Very much so. So yeah, if there are fights, this could be very good for Mythic Plus, for example, but fights where there are adds that you can, you know, guarantee will be an execute whenever this trinket comes off cooldown, or as much as possible when it comes off cooldown, and especially if those things are going to die, you could potentially get some really good value out of this. So that's interesting, a bit more niche. And then finally we have the Tome of Monstrous Constructions. Intellect again. On use, study the tome, learning the weakness of your targeted enemy. Your damaging abilities have a very high chance to deal additional damage, shadow damage, to your studied foe. Studying a new enemy removes the benefit of any prior studies. 2-minute cooldown. So what is interesting to me about this is I wonder if this would affect like enemy types. Obviously I haven't got to test it yet, but yeah, like for Mythic Plus, I'm thinking of, okay, like I can't off the top of my head now think of any examples of enemies from Mythic Plus, their specific names, but yeah, like whatever, like the gargoyles in like the little stone dogs or something in Halls of Atonement. If I put it on a stone dog, would it let me the Gargans? Would it up my damage against all of those Gargans that share the same? They are the same NPC essentially. I wonder. But yeah, we'll see. This does have a 2-minute cooldown, which seems very long, but we'll see. But kind of okay, fairly passive thing, not too interesting. But it could be a little bit different if it can carry over. And for Mythic Plus, you could be like, okay, I'll put it on these guys for the first half of the dungeon, then swap it onto these guys for the second half or something. Let us go over. Let's look at strength next. Let's look at strength. Let's look at damage first. We have first up the Decanter of Endless Howling. So this is a crit strike stat stick, and has a passive effect that your critical hits have a chance to increase your intellect. This will be your strength for a big chunk until cancelled. So they don't actually have the details for how long the buff lasts in right now. If you're below 50% health when this occurs, you also heal for, again, a small amount. So interesting one here. I'd assume that it is probably a relatively short duration, but might have a fairly high proc chance. I'm also intrigued because obviously this would work just fine for me here as a Shadow Priest, for example. This would work just fine. So will this be available for other specs, or is this going to only affect strength? That does remain to be seen, but that does seem like a pretty strong trinket for any, any strength-based spec. Possibly agility as well, probably agility as well, that favors critical strike. Next up is the Old Warrior Soul. Now, this is a strength trinket with a strength stick on it, and then has 2 equip effects. First of all, while in combat, your rage builds, increasing your haste by a big chunk every 5.2 seconds, stacking up to 0 times. So we'll see how many stacks are there, how strong are the stacks. It's hard to say, but yeah, again, very good for any haste using strength class. And then the second effect is when a nearby ally's health drops below 50%, sacrifice a big chunk of your health to heal them for the same amount, which I think is actually a pretty good effect as well. Certainly, I mean, Fury Warrior definitely jumps out as being an awesome candidate for this Old Warrior Soul, which is appropriate, isn't it? It's appropriate. But I mean, they love their haste. They have lots of self-healing. They have lots of self-shielding if they are with Condemn. So yeah, sacrificing their health to help people at lower health is actually a nice little benefit to bring to progression. So pretty cool. Next up, we have the Salvaged Fusion Amplifier, which is strength and agility as the stat stick. It's an on-use effect with a 1 minute 30-second cooldown. Empower your weapons with the Fusion Amplifier, causing your attacks to have a very high chance of doing a big chunk of arcane damage for 20 seconds. So pretty interesting here. This is obviously very good for any spec that has a cooldown that syncs up with 1 minute 30 seconds. So yeah, kind of fun, though you do need to sort of maintain a high uptime on the enemy for the full 20 seconds. You know, if you're only going to hit them for 10 seconds, it's going to lose a lot of value. So like in PvP or something, if you get CC'd, going to lose a lot of value there. Titanic Ocular Gland is here once again. So this is the a lot more stats above 50% health, but then a lot less stats of punishment below 50%. Then we have the Tormentor's Rack Fragment. Strength and agility, once again. Your damaging spells and abilities have a chance to deal an additional chunk of shadow damage every 5.2 seconds for, and we don't know how long it lasts right now. If a target dies while affected by the Tormentor's Rack Fragment, it leaves a shredded soul behind, which you can collect to gain 229 crit strike for until cancelled. So again, we don't know, probably like 12 seconds or so. That mirrors the caster one, though this is a passive effect compared to the caster one, which was an on-use trinket. So yeah, it's quite interesting. This again could be pretty good, especially in Mythic Plus, where stuff is likely to die with this on, or any fights that do have adds in the raid. This could be strong if you are a spec which is going to do well with crit strike. So interesting there. And then finally, we've got the Whispering Shard of Power for DPS warriors, for strength users. Strength trinket again. And this is a fun one. A voice whispers to you, periodically compelling you to follow its instructions. If you comply, you'll be rewarded with a big chunk of your highest secondary stat until cancelled. Again, we don't know the duration. We don't know exactly what this does yet. I'm assuming that it probably does something fairly simple, like there'll just be an image and you have to go and step on that image. But I don't know. Maybe it'll be telling you to do things like jump or like stand still for 3 seconds. You know, kind of like Ashara did, her decrees and Mythic Ashara. Actually, all the Ashara difficulties. So yeah, could be interesting. Yeah, we'll see exactly how it works, but it's one to keep an eye on. If we go then to the tanks, we still have the Endless Howling, Old Warrior Soul. Here we've got a couple of we've got actually 3 tank ones. There we go. Reactive Defense Matrix is first, Strength and Agility. Taking damage has a chance to trigger your Reactive Defense Matrix, which reflects the next chunk of damage you take back at your attacker. Reactive Defense Matrix triggers automatically when your health drops below 20%. This effect cannot occur more than once per 30 seconds. So, seems okay. It's just a passive trinket with a nice little small defensive boost when you do drop low on health. So, it seems okay. Shard of Anhild's Aegis. Strength and Agility again. This is an on-use trinket. We don't know the cooldown yet, though. Reduces all damage you take from enemies in front of you by 0 for 8 seconds. Now, this seems very good. It's like a mini shield wall, effectively. Like you obviously control where the enemies are standing. Like you know when you compress this and when it's going to get value. This could be potentially very good depending on tuning. This could be great. This is, yeah, this is your big on-use active defensive trinket, which could potentially be very strong. So that's one to keep an eye on. And then the final one is another very, very intriguing one. Another tank trinket, Strength Agility. If you are killed by no more than 532 damage, placeholder damage, you may use the Weave of Warped Fates to unwind your fate, returning yourself to life. It's an 8-minute cooldown on use trinket. That is kind of crazy. So, I'm not sure if this shares a battle res or not. Like, does it share the battle res counter? I'm assuming that it probably doesn't. That it doesn't share the battle res counter, because then it would be pretty terrible. I assume it's sort of like a shaman reincarnation. So you essentially get reincarnation on an 8-minute cooldown, though you'll only have to be killed by a small amount, right? So, you know, if you get absolutely destroyed as the tank, you're screwed. But I mean, you imagine some of these tough bosses where you can, you know, you just barely die. Happens to tanks all the time. You know, you just barely don't survive on progression. You just barely fall over dead. You get yourself a cheat death. Once per fight, effectively, with an 8-minute cooldown. You'll only really get to use it once, even on tough fights, because they're usually about 10 minutes long, and the first 2 minutes are usually not going to be very hard. So you'll get to use this once in a very tough fight, really. Or, you know, maybe 3 or so times during a dungeon, maybe. But pretty interesting. This could be kind of insane. So this is really one to keep an eye on, and we'll see how it's tuned. And then finally, I guess the thing to look at would be... let's do Demon Hunt. Yeah, Demon Hunter is a good one for agility. We can see all of their stuff. So we'll look at we'll check out the Vengeance first, seeing as we just looked at tanks. So they've got the Endless Howling, they've got the Reactive Defense Matrix. Yeah, they've got all the exact same stuff. So the tank stuff just goes across. For agility users then, so these are the unique agility trinkets. Here's one, the Relic of the Frozen Wastes. Agility, stat stick. With an equip effect, your attacks have a very high chance to do frost damage and mark your target. This effect stacks. That has an on-use effect to summon an Arubian to attack your target, dealing physical damage increased by 10% for each Frozen Waste stack you have applied to your target. And you cannot trigger while this... Frozen Waste cannot trigger while this effect's on cooldown. So I think this actually... it maybe sounds a bit complicated, but it's going to have a relatively straightforward playstyle, really. Very similar. There was a trinket just like this off the first boss of Ashara's Eternal Palace. So, you know, when you're fighting targets that don't live that long, you're just going to be building up the dot a little bit. You'll get a couple of stacks. It's just a bit of extra damage from the dot. But it's really when you fight a target for a slightly longer period of time, you're going to build this up to, let's say, you know, 5 stacks maybe. Build it up to 5 stacks, and when it is at 5 stacks, you're going to press it on use. Now, when it's on cooldown then, after using the on use, you won't be applying that dot to anything, but the on use effect will be strong enough that it is going to be worthwhile. So yeah, that's essentially how these sort of trinkets work is, you know, you get to a certain number of stacks, usually the max stacks, and then you press the trinket. You know, there's no really gaming it in different weird sort of ways. Not too much really, but that seems pretty cool, pretty fun. So yeah, it's sort of an extra thing to track, extra on-use button that rewards skill play. I like that. Again, they have the salvaged fusion amplifier, which we already looked at, the Titanic Ocular Gland we already looked at, and the Tormentor's Rack Fragment, which we already looked at. So yes, I believe that is everything. I guess we should check Hunter in case there's some sort of... Now, okay, they don't have anything crazy going on. But yeah, that is everything, guys. They are all the trinkets. So let me know what you think. Which ones do you like? I mean, honestly, there's a lot of stuff in here that I like, a lot of stuff that looks good. I would say the ones that definitely stand out to me in particular, if I look at, in fact, let's look at just all classes. We can see them all here in all the loot, all the placeholder loot. I would say the ones that stand out to me very much so. I think this Endless Howling is going to be a great little sort of stat stick, passive trinket. Yeah. Oh, wait, here's one we haven't seen. Hang on. Intellect trinket. Your damaging spells have a chance to give you forbidden knowledge, increasing your crit strike chance by a big chunk, stacking up to a few times. We don't know how long it lasts, how many times it stacks. And then an on-use effect as well with a 10-minute cooldown. Invoke the dark power of necromancy to raise the remains of a fallen ally as a skeletal warrior. And again, we don't know how long it lasts. Okay. Huh. That one seems quite fun. Okay, that's cool. Well, I like the look of that one. Pretty cool. Yeah, ones that stand out to me. Let me see. Which ones really stood out? This one definitely stands out to me. The Scrawled Word of Recall. which is for healers only, but possibly reducing the cooldown of one of just their core rotational spells. So just very simply changing up your core rotation. Pretty crazy. The Shadowed Orb of Torment. This is the most controversial one. This is Ashara's Font of Power 2.0. It looks like channel for 2 seconds and give yourself a massive chunk of mastery, but it does hurt you at the same time. We don't know what the exact numbers are going to be. The duration seems a bit too long. We shall have to see. We don't know what the cooldown is. But yeah, this could be insane for any burst damage classes to sync up, though it is an intellect, theoretically only trinket. Reducing all damage from enemies in front of you is a nice one. Which other ones were really, really cool? I think, yeah, the Whispering Shards of Power is the other one. And these two at the bottom here. Whispering Shard of Power, depending on what instructions this gives you, like if you've got to jump or, I don't know, run backwards or, you know, stand still for 3 seconds or something, this could be kind of fun. So we'll see exactly what it needs. And then the Weave of Warped Fates. This is the reincarnation trinket, effectively. If you only die by a small amount, bring yourself back to life. The other ones stand out to me. Guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.